Welcome once again to the Brownstone, Wolfe's sanctuary of logic, orchids, and murder. Do tell us where in the world you're listening from, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts. If you enjoy these cases, consider liking and subscribing. Now then, shall we begin? Every good mystery deserves good company, and a little gratitude between cases. A warm thank you to Norma, our newest patron. Your support keeps the orchids blooming and the mysteries alive. Join the circle of mystery lovers on Patreon. Link in description. Nero Wolfe and the woman who knew him before. Some days begin with coffee, others start with a woman who knows too much. That afternoon, I was 3 sips into the former when the doorbell decided the day had earned the latter. I had my feet on the desk, half a mind on the crossword, and the other half wondering whether Fritz had forgotten the lemon twist Wolfe likes in his ginger ale, when the chime gave out a long, nervous buzz. The sort of ring that doesn't ask permission, it insists. I crossed to the hall, gave the knob a turn, and got hit with the kind of entrance that could have made a hat-check boy salute. The woman standing there was past the age for introductions to matter, and well past the age for them to be safe. Her hat was small, dark blue, and expensive. Her gloves could have paid next month's rent if I ever stooped to pay any. Her eyes had seen too much and told less. "Good afternoon," she said. "I'm here to see Mr. Wolfe." I gave her my best polite bouncer smile. "That's a popular request, lady, but we're not a museum, and visiting hours depend on his mood, which today happens to be downhill." Her chin lifted slightly, a move practiced in drawing rooms and board meetings. "He will see me. Tell him Clara Vance is here." Now, I'm not in the habit of being impressed by names unless they come with a retainer check, but hers had weight, like she was used to being obeyed, not announced. Still, protocol demanded resistance. "You have an appointment?" "No." Her gaze flicked past me to the office door as if she already knew its geography. "But he'll make one." There are moments you can feel the shape of a case before it even begins, like the shadow of a fist before the swing. Something in her tone made me want to check that my revolver hadn't gone sightseeing. Still, you don't slam the door on a dame who talks like she owns the hour. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "You can wait in the office, but fair warning, interrupting Nero Wolfe during orchid hours is like waking a bear for weather advice." She glided in, the scent of violet and trouble following her. Fritz, punctual as a Swiss clock, appeared from the dining room archway and took her coat like it was spun from glass. She thanked him with a nod that said she was used to good servants and bad secrets. I led her to the red leather chair facing Wolfe's desk and hit the intercom. "Client, or something claiming to be, Miss Clara Vance to see you." For a moment, silence. Then Wolfe's voice floated down the wire, smoother than the beer he wasn't yet allowed. "Archie, I said no visitors until 4. She says it's urgent and personal." A pause. "Personal?" That's her story. Another pause. Then, like a door closing quietly in the dark. "Very well. Show her in." That was unusual. Wolfe doesn't do personal unless it involves cuisine or the orchids, but the tone had a tightness I didn't like. She didn't wait for me to guide her. She walked in as if she knew the rug's pattern by heart. Wolfe was in his chair behind the desk, immense and still, a mountain of grey silk and disapproval. The afternoon light from the west windows gave his forehead a pale glow, the kind that could make a bishop nervous. "Good afternoon, madam," he said. "You claim acquaintance?" "I do." Her voice softened, but only a little. "Though it's been years and continents." Wolfe's eyes, usually half-lidded, opened fully. For a fraction of a second I saw something you don't often see in him. Memory, maybe even regret. Then it vanished, replaced by the calm that could freeze lava. "You exaggerate, Mrs. Vance," he said finally. "Continents, perhaps. Years, certainly. Acquaintance, debatable." That one landed. She smiled faintly, and there was history in it. "Then let's say we were acquainted with the same danger, Mr. Wolfe." My eyebrows took the elevator. Wolfe caught the motion and gave me a glare that said, "Sit and listen for once." I sat. "I require the nature of your errand," Wolfe said, folding his hands. She placed a cream envelope on the blotter between them, careful as a surgeon setting down a scalpel. "I'm being blackmailed," she said, "over letters written by my late husband, Major Henry Vance. They concern events in the Balkans, 25 years ago." Wolfe's breathing shifted slightly, the only clue his composure had sprung a leak. "And why, pray, should this concern me?" "Because," she said evenly, "you were there." You could have heard the radiator sigh. Wolfe didn't move, didn't blink. Only his eyes narrowed, the pupils shrinking like a camera lens finding focus. "You are mistaken," he said. "I'm not. The letters mention a man called the Montenegrin." That got him. The hand nearest the bell cord twitched before settling. I'd seen Wolfe angry, amused, triumphant, but never caught off guard. She went on. "The blackmailer says he'll release them to the papers. There are names, operations, things that would destroy more than reputation. I can't go to the police. I was told you could be discreet." Wolfe leaned back, shut his eyes and exhaled through his nose, the sound halfway between resignation and contempt. "Phooey, the Balkans. They breed intrigue as rabbits breed progeny." "Then you'll help me?" He opened his eyes again, calm restored. "Possibly. That depends on whether you seek justice or absolution." "Both," she said quietly. Archie Goodwin, Master of Tact, would have liked to applaud. Instead, I reached for my notebook. "If I might, Mrs. Vance, how much is this blackmail worth in cash and sentiment?" She hesitated. $10,000 was demanded. "But it's not the money. Those letters, they're personal." "Personal," I repeated. Always the word before disaster. Wolfe shot me a look like a thrown paperweight. "Archie." "All right," I said, shutting up. She drew a small photograph from her handbag and laid it beside the envelope. Wolfe's fingers, usually lazy as tree roots, moved with sudden precision. He turned the photo, stared, then set it down as if it might explode. The picture showed a man in uniform, tall, lean, smiling faintly. Written in faded ink at the bottom, "Henry Vance, Montenegro, 1918. Only, I'd seen Wolfe look at a dozen photos before and never once like that. The muscles around his mouth went rigid. "I was told he died," he said softly. "So was I," she answered. That did it. I cleared my throat. "If I might interrupt the reunion, do we have a blackmailer with a name, or is this a ghost story with props?" Her eyes flicked to me. The letters were delivered by messenger, no return address, but there was a postmark, Midtown Station 4, yesterday morning. "Do you still have the envelope?" "Yes." She reached into her bag again and handed it to me. Wolfe gestured. "Examine it." The paper smelled of perfume and old panic. The handwriting was blocky, deliberate, like someone trying too hard not to leave a trail. No fingerprints, of course. I handed it back. "Neat job, postmark's clear. No help there unless the messenger has a conscience." "Which," Wolfe said dryly, "would be a first." Mrs. Vance rose, smoothing her skirt. "I don't expect miracles, Mr. Wolfe. Only silence, and perhaps understanding." Wolfe studied her. "Understanding, madam, is a perilous luxury. I'll consider whether to undertake this matter." She nodded, as if she'd expected nothing more. "I'll await your word." When she left, the room felt heavier, as though she'd taken the air and left the ghosts. I shut the door and turned. Wolfe hadn't moved, but his eyes were fixed on that photograph as if it was staring back. "Well," I said, "when a lady says she knew you before the war, it's either romance or espionage. I'd bet my tie clip on the second." Wolfe's mouth twitched. "You will refrain from both betting and speculating. File that envelope. And, Archie, sit." I sat. He leaned back, fingers steepled. "There are matters best forgotten." "I've noticed that about you," I said, "but they seem to keep your address." He sighed, a sound like wind leaving a cave. "Archie, fetch the envelope to the safe. Then please, silence, I must think." Which, translated from Wolfe's, meant, "The past just knocked, and I don't like its shoes." I tucked the photo and envelope away, shut the safe, and turned back. Wolfe hadn't moved. "Do you know what this is about?" I asked. "Yes," he said finally. "And if I'm correct, it began before you were born, and may yet finish before I am dead." That was his idea of a bedtime story. I left him to his thoughts and headed for the kitchen, where Fritz was polishing silver like it owed him money. "Coffee," I said. He looked up. "Strong?" "Make it armoured." Back in the office, Wolfe hadn't stirred. I placed the cup on his desk. He didn't thank me, but he didn't need to. Some habits in this house run deeper than gratitude. Outside, the late afternoon light crawled across the carpet and died. Inside, Nero Wolfe sat in silence, alone with a ghost from 1918, and I sat across from him, wondering which of us had just opened the door to trouble. There's a silence in Wolfe's office that has weight, thick, upholstered, and capable of crushing small talk. After Clara Vance left, the kind of silence she'd brought with her stayed behind like perfume that didn't want to quit. Wolfe hadn't moved. He sat with his hands folded on his stomach, eyes half closed, the look of a man auditioning for sainthood and trying to forget why he was denied the role. I gave it a fair minute, then another. Finally, I said, "I take it she wasn't your long-lost sister." He didn't answer, which was either restraint or homicide prevention. "Okay," I said. "Maybe an old flame from the days when you could still see your shoes without mechanical assistance." That got me one eyelid's worth of glare. Progress. "Archie," he said, his voice dry as the sherry he hadn't poured, "your levity is untimely. Sit." I was already sitting, but I adjusted it so he'd know I'd complied. "If it's that untimely, maybe you should wind the clock back to 1919 and tell me what tune we're dancing to." He drew in a slow breath. 1918, Montenegro. He said it the way a priest might say Judgment Day, a miserable piece of topography infested with ambition. That was more history than he'd given me about his past in 5 years of partnership. I kept still. "I was," he continued, "attached in a civilian capacity to certain Allied intelligence operations, a liaison between competing fools. Major Henry Vance was among them." "The husband?" "Yes." He opened his eyes now, dark and focused. "He vanished one night before the armistice. There were rumours, disobedience, treachery. I dismissed them." "And Mrs. Vance thinks you didn't dismiss them hard enough?" "I think," Wolfe said, "she seeks to bury something already decomposed, and she will not succeed." That sounded final enough to close the subject, but curiosity is my worst-paying habit. "If you were attached, why so touchy? She practically said you were there when it happened." He scowled. "The past is a quagmire, Archie. Step once and you are mired." "Sure, but quagmires sometimes spit up souvenirs." He grunted, a sound halfway between threat and digestion, and reached for the bell cord. Fritz appeared in the doorway before the chime had settled. "Beer," Wolfe said. 2 bottles. Chilled." I blinked. "You're breaking your own rule. It's not 5 o'clock." "It is," he said, glancing at the clock. "In Montenegro. You can't argue with geography when it's used for mood lighting." Fritz disappeared, and Wolfe leaned back, folding himself into stillness again. I gave up waiting for elaboration and went to the phone. "Saul Panzer," I told the operator. When his steady baritone answered, I said, "Saul, do a background run on a Mrs. Clara Vance. Upper-class type, lives uptown, smells like violets and money. Says she's getting blackmail notes about her late husband's Balkan adventures. Find out if she's really rich or just auditioning." "Give me an hour," Saul said, and hung up. Efficiency like that should be bottled. Fritz returned with the beer and the proper glasses. Wolfe poured exactly half his into the goblet, inhaled it like a connoisseur cataloguing memories, and drank. "Archie," he said after a moment, "our visitor's trouble may prove transient, or fatal. In either case, I prefer not to meddle." "That's new," I said. "You usually like your meddling with a side of retainer." He ignored that and stared at the condensation on his glass. "Major Vance was no fool, but he trusted one." "Meaning?" "Meaning I grow weary of your catechism." "Fine," I said. "I'll let Saul do the talking when he calls back." He didn't reply. I retreated to my desk, opened the daybook, and pretended to update the expenses column while actually writing Clara Vance, blackmail, Balkans. Wolfe rattled. At 6:20 the phone rang. Wolfe looked up like a bear disturbed by thunder. I picked up. "Goodwin," Saul's voice calm, clipped. "She's legitimate. Widow, 48, owns majority shares in something called the Adriatic Line. Shipping outfit handling Mediterranean cargo. Headquarters Midtown. Also sits on 2 charity boards and plays bridge with senators' wives. No scandals on record." "Until now," I said. "Any sign of the blackmail?" "She's had 3 letters in the last month, all mailed from the same Midtown postal box. Postage paid cash. The location's a block from a photography studio run by a Paul Retnick, specializes in society portraits. Photographs and blackmail, I said. They go together like gin and regrets. Saul added, one more thing. Someone's been watching her house. Dark sedan, no plates. She's nervous enough to hire protection, but she hasn't. Thanks, Saul. You earn your retainer the hard way. I hung up and turned. Wolfe hadn't asked, but his eyes were waiting. I gave him the report in one sweep. When I got to the part about the photography studio, he lifted a finger. Repeat the name. Paul Retnick. His brows drew together. I know that name. From Montenegro. He glared. From logic, Mr. Goodwin. No one who mails blackmail letters from so public a place expects longevity. Either he is a fool, or someone wishes us to believe he is. Then which is it? I don't yet know. He closed his eyes again, the signal that conversation had expired. I leaned back, lit a cigarette, and let the smoke outline the tension in the room. Evening shadows stretched across the carpet, crawling toward Wolfe like silent reporters. If your past had a soundtrack, I said finally, it'd be played on a broken gramophone. Same tune, never enough lyrics. His eyes opened. Archie. Yes, sir. Leave the past where it festers. Sure, only it seems to have mailed us a postcard. That earned a full-bodied fouille. Confound it. Must you reduce every ulcer to repartee? It's my civic duty, I said. Keeps your blood pressure from retiring early. He didn't dignify that. Instead, he reached for a note card from his desk drawer and wrote something in his precise old-world hand. When he finished, he slipped it into an envelope and addressed it. Delivery? I asked. By hand, to Inspector Kramer. That made me sit up. You're calling in the police? I'm not calling them in. I'm informing them that any correspondence involving the late Major Vance may intersect their jurisdiction. It is prudent. Translation: you want Kramer to stumble across it first, so he owes you later. His eyes twinkled faintly. Your cynicism, Archie, is a defense against comprehension. I grinned. And yours is a hobby that eats at 8 o'clock. That reminded him of dinner. His gaze slid to the clock. Indeed. He pressed the bell cord. Fritz materialized like a ghost wearing an apron. Dinner, Fritz. Right away, sir. As Fritz vanished again, Wolfe turned back to me. You will, before dining, compose a memorandum for our files. Mrs. Clara Vance, blackmail, origin unknown, subject to verification. Keep it factual. Meaning no editorial comments about ghosts or Montenegro. Precisely. I set to typing. The clack of the keys was the only sound in the room besides Wolfe's slow breathing. Outside, a streetcar rattled down 35th like it had someplace better to be. After a few minutes, I said, You realize, of course, that if the lady's telling the truth, somebody out there thinks Major Vance is worth killing over. Again. He didn't answer until the last period hit the page. Archie, war breeds debts unpaid in coin. Leave them. Sure, I said. But sometimes the creditors show up at your door wearing perfume. He gave a small grunt that might have been amusement. Your metaphor is clumsy, but apt. Thanks, I polished them weakly. He looked toward the window, where the day was dying in streaks of orange and blue. You are young, he said quietly. You still believe every mystery yields to daylight. And you don't? I know better. The elevator groaned faintly as Fritz descended toward the kitchen. I filed the memo, shut the drawer, and stood. Well, the past may fester, but it's sure lively tonight. Want me to tail that photography angle tomorrow? Perhaps, he said, depending on Kramer's response. For now, no. Which, translated from Wolfe, meant yes, but after I've thought of a reason to deny it. At 8 sharp, Fritz reappeared, bearing the silver tray. The smell of veal marengo marched ahead of him like an army with good rations. Wolfe's nostrils flared, and whatever ghost had haunted him since Clara Vance crossed the threshold retreated to wait its turn. He rose, a minor miracle, and said, Come, Archie, dinner. I followed him to the dining room, thinking that if the Great War was finished, nobody had told Nero Wolfe's conscience. The ghosts of 1919 were alive and well on West 35th Street, and one of them had just mailed a letter from Midtown. At 10:45 the next morning, I was halfway through my second cup of coffee and a crossword clue that refused to confess when the doorbell gave a solid, humorless buzz. Fritz was up to his elbows in pastry downstairs, so the honour fell to me. The man on the stoop wasn't the milkman or a client, unless the milkman had suddenly developed a taste for cigars and homicide. Inspector Kramer stood there, hat low, jaw set, and looking like he'd already used up his daily allowance of patience. He didn't barge in, which meant the weather forecast for hell had just shifted to frost warnings. "Morning, Kramer," I said. "If you're here for coffee, I just finished the last cup. If you're here for Wolfe, you'd better check the clock." "It's 10:45, he growled. "That still counts as morning." "Not in this house," I said. "He's upstairs with his orchids till 11. You can wait in the office, but if you talk above a whisper, the orchids will wilt and Wolfe will have your badge bronzed." He gave me a look that could have scraped paint but followed me in. The office was warm with sunlight, dust motes dancing through it like they'd paid rent. Kramer parked himself in the red chair across from Wolfe's empty one and pulled out a cigar he had no intention of lighting. "This isn't a social call, Goodwin," he said. "We've got a stiff downtown, Paul Retnick." That name made my stomach perform a minor acrobatic routine. "Photographer?" "Yeah, private type, small-time fixer, found dead this morning at the Fairmont Hotel on 47th. "Natural causes?" "Sure," Kramer said. "If swallowing cyanide is your idea of nature." He pulled out a small notepad, flipped it open and read without looking up. Among his belongings, an envelope addressed to Mrs. Clara Vance. The silence between us thickened. I didn't have to fake surprise. Wolfe's poker face was upstairs, but mine wasn't bad either. I leaned back and whistled low. Well, that's a coincidence worth writing home about. Kramer's eyes narrowed. "Coincidences are for fairy tales. You and Wolfe saw that woman yesterday." "Your sources are getting better," I said. "Soon you'll have wiretaps in the kitchen." "Don't tempt me. She came here, didn't she?" "Sure," I said easily. "To complain about her photographer's rates." "Cut the flippancy." He jabbed the unlit cigar in my direction. "What did she want from Wolfe?" "Advice," I said. "He's very good at it." Kramer's mouth twisted, but before he could bark again, the elevator groaned. Wolfe descended like a king reluctantly visiting the peasants. He wore his yellow silk house jacket and the look of a man aware of both his dignity and his digestive schedule. "Good morning, Inspector," Wolfe said, taking his chair. "To what do we owe the intrusion?" Kramer didn't waste time. "A dead man, Wolfe. Paul Retnick. Found with letters addressed to a lady you entertained yesterday." Wolfe's brows rose, but his tone stayed calm. "Ah, Mrs. Vance. So you admit she was here?" "I admit nothing of consequence," Wolfe said. "Mrs. Vance requested advice regarding an anonymous extortion attempt. I listened. Nothing more." Kramer grunted. "You always do that dance, 2 steps short of obstruction." Wolfe steepled his fingers. "I'm not required to supply information irrelevant to your inquiry." "Dead man, cyanide, blackmail letters. That sounds relevant to me." Archie Goodwin, referee, intervened. "Before you two start the tango, Inspector, any idea how long he'd been dead?" Kramer flipped through his notes. "Medical says sometime between midnight and 3 a.m. No sign of struggle. Window locked from inside. Cyanide capsule found near his hand. Looks like suicide, but the setup's too neat." "Meaning?" Wolfe asked. "Meaning the bottle he used had no fingerprints, not even his own. Somebody wiped it clean before leaving it beside him." "Or after," Wolfe murmured. "A curious refinement." Kramer squinted at him. "So, you don't think he took it himself?" "I rarely think the dead act with initiative." Kramer ignored that and pulled out another sheet. "We found a small black ledger in his drawer. You'll love this, Wolfe. One entry. CV $3,000 received. Another. HV alive." Wolfe's eyelids dropped a fraction, but his voice didn't waver. "I see." "Do you?" Kramer asked. "Because I don't. Who's HV?" "I'm not in the habit of conjecture." "Well, I am. HV could be Henry Vance, Clara's dead husband. Only maybe he isn't dead." "That," Wolfe said, "would be most inconvenient." Kramer's patience hit its upper limit. "Look, Wolfe, I don't care if you knew the lady's husband in the war or in kindergarten. I just need what she told you yesterday." "She told me," Wolfe said, "that she was being blackmailed, that is all." "That's not good enough." "It will have to suffice." Kramer leaned forward, jabbing the air with his cigar. "You're obstructing again. If I find out you're withholding evidence—" "You will huff, I presume," Wolfe interrupted, "and perhaps puff, but you will not blow my house down." That one landed. Kramer's jaw worked, but before he could reply, Fritz appeared in the doorway, silent, immaculate, and faintly apologetic. "Lunch is ready, sir." "Thank you, Fritz," Wolfe said, rising slightly, "but the orchids are first." "You're leaving?" Kramer barked. "It is 11 precisely," Wolfe replied. "My routines are inviolable. I dine at noon." Kramer stood, his cigar clamped between his teeth like a trigger. "You're unbelievable." "On the contrary," Wolfe said, "I am quite consistent." He turned toward the elevator, dismissing us both, but paused. "Archie, accompany the inspector to the door, then telephone Mr. Saul Panzer. We may require his diligence." "Right," I said. Kramer followed me out into the hall, grumbling under his breath. "Every time I step into that office, I lose 5 years off my life." "Cheer up," I said. "It's character building. And for what it's worth, if Retnick sold dirt, someone bought the deluxe package, with poison as a receipt." He stopped at the door, looked at me, and grunted something halfway between a curse and agreement. "Tell Wolfe this isn't over." "Tell the Commissioner that nothing ever is." He left, trenchcoat flapping, and the smell of his cigar ghost lingered in the air like unfinished business. I went back to the office, looked around, and muttered to no one in particular, "Secrets for sale, and the seller's dead." The phone rang. Saul's voice came cool and dry. "You told me to keep an eye on the Fairmont, Archie. Guess who checked in there last night under an alias?" "Don't keep me in suspense." "Mrs. Clara Vance. Name on the register, Mrs. Charles Vane." That pulled the floor an inch lower. "You're sure?" "Sure as the morgue tag on Retnick." "Stay on it, Saul. I'll brief Wolfe if I can get past the begonias." I hung up and stared at the empty desk where Wolfe's chair loomed like a monument to self-control. The morning light had shifted, turning the brass globe to a dull burnish. Upstairs, through the ceiling, I could hear faint sounds, the slow shuffle of Wolfe's feet, the click of orchid pots being moved. He was communing with his flowers, pretending they didn't smell faintly of cyanide and war. I sat down, opened the daybook, and began typing the memo for our files. Subject: Paul Retnick, deceased. Cyanide poisoning. Possible blackmail link to Clara Vance. Ledger note: HV alive. When I finished, I lit a cigarette and stared at the smoke spiral toward the ceiling. If you live long enough around Nero Wolfe, you learn that coincidence is a polite name for design. And when design shows up wearing perfume and a funeral veil, it means business. At 11:59 on the dot, the elevator descended. Wolfe emerged, orchid dust on his sleeve. He didn't look at me. "Archie, lunch." And that was that. The murder of Paul Retnick would wait exactly 1 hour while Nero Wolfe dined. By 2:30 that afternoon, the brownstone was under siege. By paper. Every flat surface of Wolfe's office was littered with newspapers, open to the same page, glaring headlines in type big enough to insult the alphabet. The Gazette was the worst offender. War hero or war hypocrite? Nero Wolfe linked to Balkan scandal. I've seen Wolfe angry before, usually when Fritz forgot to strain the broth twice, but this was different. This was the kind of fury that didn't shout, it simmered. He sat at his desk, motionless, the fingers of his right hand drumming once every 5 seconds on the blotter. I could almost hear the blood pressure arguing with the laws of physics. "Archie," he said finally, in a tone you could butter toast with, "summon Mr. Cohen." I'd already tried that. "Lon's on his way. He says he didn't write the article, which means he's either innocent or scared." Wolfe grunted. "The latter is more plausible. Courage in journalists is as rare as concision." At 2:45, the doorbell rang. Fritz, who hadn't said a word since breakfast, opened the door to Lon Cohen, the Gazette's resident saint of deadlines and sinner of discretion. He came in with his hat low and apology higher. "Wolfe," he said, "before you throw me out, I didn't authorize that story." "Then you permitted it," Wolfe said. "A sin of omission." Lon sighed and dropped his briefcase on a chair. "The managing editor got an anonymous packet. Photos, documents, copies of letters signed by Major Henry Vance. They tie him to post-war smuggling through the Adriatic line, and someone added a note saying Wolfe helped bury it. That's red meat for the Sunday section." Wolfe's nostrils flared, which in his world counted as profanity. "The suggestion that I harbored traitors is both idiotic and defamatory." "That's why I came," Lon said. "To give you warning. The edition's on the presses. I can't stop it, but I can get a correction in tomorrow's. Tomorrow, Wolfe said, is too late. By then, rumour will have finished its breakfast and be ordering lunch. Archie Goodwin, public relations consultant, decided to step in. What about the packet? Where did it come from? Postmarked Midtown, no return address. The same postal district Retnick used, I said. Wolfe looked up at that. Indeed. Lon pulled a folded photograph from his coat pocket and laid it on the desk. That's one of the prints in the packet, same as the one the police found in Retnick's room. I leaned over Wolfe's shoulder. It was the photo from the Adriatic Line office, Major Vance smiling beside Retnick under the Balkan sun, dated 1946. Only this version had a fresh crease across the bottom, as though handled recently. That, I said, is the ghost that refuses to stay buried. Lon's voice dropped. Wolfe, somebody's trying to smear you by tying you to Vance. The line in the story says you worked with him on intelligence assignments, maybe covered up his post-war activities. Rubbish, Wolfe said. Major Vance's operations ended before the armistice. I never saw him again. You're sure? I asked. He turned his head slowly. Archie. Just confirming, I said. You know how these ghosts get around. He ignored me, addressing Lon. The story will require a public rebuttal, but I will not dance to the tune of tabloids. You will print my statement verbatim. Sure, Lon said, fishing a pencil from his pocket. Dictate it. Wolfe began, eyes half closed. I, Nero Wolfe, categorically deny any association with Major Henry Vance beyond my documented service as a civilian consultant in 1918. I have neither concealed a traitor nor abetted a crime. The attempt to connect me to the Adriatic Line's current affairs is an ignorant calumny. Those who know me require no defence. Those who do not are unworthy of one. Lon's pencil scratched. That'll do. I'll get it in the noon edition. See that you do, Wolfe said, and inform your editor that libel laws are not theoretical. Lon stood. You'll get a visit from Kramer soon. He's under pressure. City Hall's breathing down his neck to reopen every file with your name in it. That earned a low, phooey. Wolfe gestured toward the door. Go. When the front door closed, Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes. For a long minute, nothing moved but the clock's second hand. Finally, he said, Archie, the world is peopled by idiots and editors. They often coincide. That's democracy, I said. Gives everybody a headline. He glared. Cease your inanities. The photograph was duplicated deliberately. Someone has access to the original negatives, perhaps Retnick's employer. You mean Kelder? Or Mrs. Vance herself, he said. Desperation breeds recklessness. The phone rang then, and I grabbed it. Wolfe residence. Goodwin, Kramer's voice growled through the wire. You tell Wolfe I'm coming over. 5 minutes. Hold the applause, I said. He's here. Kramer arrived true to his word. 5 minutes flat, raincoat still damp, cigar already chewing itself to death between his teeth. He didn't wait for an invitation, but at least he wiped his feet. I don't have to tell you what this looks like, he said, slapping a copy of the Gazette on Wolfe's desk. The commissioner's chewing gravel. I need to know if you were in touch with Henry Vance any time after the war. Wolfe didn't even glance at the paper. No. Care to elaborate? I do not. Then elaborate to me, Kramer snapped. I've got a murder and a smear campaign, and your name's in both. Wolfe drew in a breath, slow and dangerous. Inspector, you are here because someone wants me compromised. The coincidence of your visit, the Gazette story, and Retnick's corpse is no coincidence at all. You may pursue your inquiry, but do so with discernment. That's easy for you to say. You sit here with your beer and your orchids while the rest of us chase corpses. Because, Wolfe said, you prefer motion to progress. The room thickened with silence. Kramer stared, chewing his cigar like it owed him rent. Finally he said, quieter, Look, I don't want to see your name dragged through mud any more than you do, but if I find proof you're mixed up in this, I can't protect you. Wolfe's tone softened a fraction. Your integrity is not in doubt, Inspector, nor mine. That, from Wolfe, counted as a handshake. Kramer turned to leave, then stopped. One more thing. Don't let Goodwin play smart with me. If he's been tailing people, I want a report. Inspector, Wolfe said firmly, Mr. Goodwin acts only under my instruction. You will not impugn him. I leaned back and grinned. Thanks, boss. You're a regular guardian angel. Wolfe didn't look at me. I defend competence, Archie, not virtue. Kramer snorted. All right, Wolfe. I'll wait for your report, but not forever. He left, trailing cigar smoke and exasperation. Wolfe let out a long breath. Archie, file this under vulgar harassment. I started stacking the papers. So far, we've got one blackmailer dead, one major resurrected, and now a front-page scandal. We're batting 1,000. He reached for the bell cord. Beer. I said, You know, you can't blackmail a man with no shame, but you've got enough pride to power the subway. Phooey, he muttered, as Fritz appeared in the doorway with the tray. As Wolfe poured, the golden liquid catching the late morning light, I watched him reclaim his calm like a general surveying a lost battle he intended to win. Outside, the newspapers shouted lies. Inside, Nero Wolfe drank his beer and plotted silence into strategy. By the time I reached Greenwich Village, the sun had already ducked behind the rooftops, leaving the streets dim enough to make you wonder if the war blackout had never ended. The address from Retnick's ledger, number 214 Carmine Street, turned out to be a boarding house with delusions of charm. Lace curtains clinging to life, a rooms available sign that looked like it had fought 3 landlords and lost. Inside, the hall smelled of boiled cabbage and low rent. The wallpaper had once been floral but now resembled camouflage for mildew. I pressed the bell and waited through the kind of silence that suggests tenants who don't answer questions. A door opened at the far end, and a woman appeared, all angles and apron. You looking for a room? She asked. Depends who's in number 3B. Her eyes narrowed. You the insurance? Something like that, I said. Name's Goodwin, private inquiry. She hesitated, then shrugged. Mr. Vance, quiet, pays weekly. Don't drink, don't talk. 3rd floor, end of the hall. Vance, alive and well enough to pay rent. If ghosts started paying rent, this guy would have back taxes. The stairs creaked like they were practicing testimony. Each step released another layer of the building's biography. Dust, old cigars, and somebody's cooking ambitions gone wrong. Halfway up, a bulb flickered overhead, humming like a nervous witness. At number 3B I paused, listening. A shuffle, a cough, then the slow scrape of a chair. I knocked. Who is it? The voice was thin but carried an accent that had travelled rough roads. Archie Goodwin, I said. I'm here about Paul Retnick. A silence followed, long enough to grow moss on. Then the door opened 3 inches, held by a safety chain. One grey eye studied me, sharp as a bayonet. I do not know the name, the man said. Maybe not, I said, but Retnick knew yours. Henry Vance. The chain unlatched. The door opened wider. The man who stood there looked like he'd been kept in storage too long. Tall but bent, hair gone silver, cheeks hollow. He wore a threadbare suit and the posture of someone still standing at attention from an order given decades ago. You are mistaken, he said carefully. My name is Harold Vane. Sure, I said. And I'm George Washington. Mind if I come in, General? He stepped aside, either resigned or curious. The room was a shrine to caution. Narrow bed, trunk by the window, no pictures, no clutter. A single light bulb dangled from the ceiling, swaying gently in the draught. I closed the door behind me. You've got good taste in pseudonyms, I said. Drop the R and it almost rhymes with Vance. Convenient. He moved toward the window, avoiding my eyes. You are from the police? No, worse. I work for Nero Wolfe. That made him turn. The eyes changed, recognition sharp and unwilling. Wolfe, he repeated, tasting the name like a secret returned. He is alive. He's alive, sedentary and annoyed, which makes him dangerous. He gave a faint smile. I remember that. So do I said. He thought you were dead. So did your wife. The smile vanished. My wife is dead. Not as of yesterday. He stared at me like I'd opened a coffin. Impossible. Tell that to the tabloids. She visited Wolfe's office 2 days ago. Then your photographer friend Retnick turned up poisoned. His hand trembled on the sill. I did not kill him. Good. That saves me paperwork. But if you're not dead, and you didn't kill him, you'd better start talking fast before someone else finishes the job. He turned, the lamplight catching a scar along his jaw. Thin, white, and old. I cannot, he said simply. If I speak, others die. Yeah, I said. That line plays great in the movies, but out here it ends with cyanide. He moved to a small table and picked up a pocket watch, polished smooth by years of worry. He turned it in his hand like a prayer. When he opened it, the light glinted off an engraving. HV to NW, 1917. I whistled softly. Well, well, that's a pretty souvenir. NW stands for who I think it does. He closed the watch quickly. She saved me, he said quietly. Once, long ago. I owed her everything. Her? I asked. You mean Clara? He shook his head. No, another. No more questions. I leaned back against the door. Sorry, friend, you're a headline with legs. We can't afford to let you vanish again. He looked past me toward the hall. For your sake, you should go. They are watching. Who's they? But he was already moving, gathering papers from the table, stuffing them into his trunk. I stepped forward. Hold it. You're not checking out. The flickering bulb chose that moment to die, plunging the room into a yellow half-dark. Outside, a car backfired, only it wasn't a car. 2 quick cracks echoed off the brick. Vance froze, then fell against the table. I grabbed him as he slid down. A thin line of blood traced his collar. Vance, who? He tried to speak, but his breath came out like paper tearing. I heard footsteps pounding down the fire escape. By the time I reached the window, a shadow was already disappearing into the alley. Broad-shouldered, hat low. Too far for chasing without a partner. I turned back. Vance was still breathing. Barely. I snatched the phone from the nightstand and dialed home. Wolfe answered on the second ring. Archie? Yeah. And don't say anything until you hear this. I've found Vance. A pause sharp enough to cut. Alive? Was. He just tried to prove it by dying again. Somebody shot him. Confound it! The word snapped through the receiver. Where are you? Carmine Street boarding house. He's still breathing. Leave him. Leave him? He's got information. Archie. His voice was low and dangerous now. Get out. Now. Do not wait for the police. They will make you their suspect and me their scapegoat. Out. That tone was 1 step short of command and 1 step past affection. I looked at Vance, grey, motionless. Fine, I said. But you owe me a new pair of shoes if these get blood on them. I grabbed the watch from the table, only for a look, mind you, and set it back where it belonged. Then I wiped my prints from the phone and headed for the stairs. The landlady met me on the landing. What happened? She gasped. Tenant's sick, I said. Call an ambulance. By the time I hit the street, sirens were already starting their distant song. I ducked into a side alley and walked fast, keeping to the shadows until I found a cab. The driver glanced in the mirror. Where to, pal? 35th Street. And step on it. But don't kill anybody unless he's already dead. He didn't ask. Cab drivers in Manhattan never do. Back at the brownstone, Fritz opened the door before I knocked. He must have been waiting with a preemptive look of disapproval. Mr. Wolfe is in the office, he said. Wolfe was on his feet when I entered, which is like seeing the Statue of Liberty stretch. His face was stone. Well? He's alive enough to get shot for it. 2 rounds in the chest. Somebody didn't like his lease renewal. Wolfe closed his eyes. Fool that I am, he muttered. Montenegro returns to mock me. I sank into my chair. You want the good news? He opened one eye. There is none. Right. That saves time. He reached for the bell cord, paused, then let his hand fall. No beer, not yet. Archie, did you take anything from the scene? Only a look. Good. We shall let Kramer find what he expects to find. Meanwhile, type your notes while the details are fresh. I rolled a sheet into the machine and started typing. The clack of keys filled the room, steady and mechanical. When I was done, I slid the page across his desk. He read silently, then looked up. Archie, if you had remained a moment longer, you might be dead. That's the trouble with these cases, I said. The rent's high and the neighbours shoot. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. Phooey, get cleaned up, dinner in 20 minutes. As I headed for the door, he added quietly, Good work, Archie. It was the closest thing to a hug you can get from Nero Wolfe. The rain started as I hit the street, soft and secretive, the kind that pretends to be weather, but ends up feeling like guilt. I was halfway down Carmine when I heard the sirens. Manhattan has a way of sounding innocent about murder, just another song in the night traffic. When the squad car stopped in front of the boarding house, I was 2 doors away and debating whether to light a cigarette or start running. The smarter move would have been the latter. The stupider one won. 2 uniforms jumped out, one of them carrying a flashlight the size of a billy club. "You, hold it!" That's when the voice came from the alley. Flat, steady, and blessedly familiar. He's with me. Saul Panzer. Of all the guardian angels available after dark, I got the one who wore a fedora and never smiled. The cop blinked. "You're what?" Saul showed him something from his wallet, something laminated that made the officer's shoulders drop. "He's assisting in a private investigation under authorization. You'll find the landlord upstairs screaming about it." While the cop went to check, Saul turned to me. "You left the scene hot enough to fry eggs. Wolfe sent me." "I didn't order room service," I said. "How'd you find me so fast?" "Luck. And Fritz said Wolfe had that tone, the one before ulcers." "Then you know it's serious," I said. We moved toward the door as a stretcher passed us. Vance, still grey, and very much not paying rent anymore. His face had gone the colour of fog on a morgue slab. I stared for a second too long. Saul touched my elbow. "Come on." Inside, the smell of wet wool mixed with cyanide, a bitter almond tang that never wins popularity contests. The landlady was weeping on the stairs. A uniform was bagging a teacup. "You see that?" I murmured. "Same brew Retnick took to his grave. Somebody's cleaning up their guest list." Saul crouched by the table, eyes quick as a camera shutter. "Teacup, teaspoon, 1 sugar cube, no lipstick. You didn't touch anything?" "Just the phone, but I wiped it." "Good boy," he said, which from Saul was like a standing ovation. The detective in charge, Pearly Stebbins, wearing his usual bulldog expression, appeared in the doorway. "Goodwin, what the hell are you doing here again? You breed murders now." "Only the friendly kind," I said. "Relax, Pearly. I didn't pour the tea." "Tell that to Kramer. He's fit to chew through his badge. Says Wolfe's stirring ghosts." "Wolfe doesn't stir anything before lunch." Stebbins glowered, then turned to Saul. "You too, Panzer? You boys running a reunion?" "Just helping clear Goodwin off your blotter," Saul said smoothly. "You'll find cyanide residue in the cup, same as Retnick." Pearly snorted. "We'll find your fingerprints all over this dump before we find that." I gave him my best grin. "Then I'll be famous in housekeeping circles." He didn't laugh. "You two beat it. Kramer wants you at the precinct in the morning." Saul nudged me. "That's our cue." Outside, the rain had thickened into a curtain. Saul led me around the corner to a grey sedan I hadn't noticed before. We climbed in. He drove like a man allergic to small talk. Finally I said, "You ever see a ghost die twice in 1 week?" He kept his eyes on the street. Vance wasn't a ghost. He was leverage. Somebody's removing leverage. Meaning, whoever's behind this doesn't want a scandal. They want erasure. "Nice word," I said. "Wolfe will love it." When we reached the brownstone, it was close to midnight. Fritz opened the door wearing an expression suitable for the end of civilization. "He is in the office," he whispered, as though the air itself might disapprove. Wolfe was in his chair, massive and still, eyes half closed. The smell of orchids hung faintly over the room, as if they were trying to remind him there were still living things in the world. He didn't open his eyes. "Well?" "Vance just finished his second attempt at dying," I said. "This one took." His fingers tightened on the armrest. "Poison?" "Same as Retnick. Cyanide, gift wrapped in tea." He opened his eyes then, and for a second I thought I saw something unguarded behind them. Grief or maybe anger with a brain attached. "Pfui, inelegant. Murder by beverage is for the unimaginative." "Yeah," I said, "but it's consistent. Someone's tidying up." "Who saw you?" "Stebbins. He says Kramer wants my autograph at the precinct tomorrow." "Confound it!" Wolfe thundered, actually rising 2 inches from the chair before sinking back like a punctured dirigible. "I told you to leave." "I did leave. The corpse left faster." That earned me a glare hot enough to fry Fritz's eggs. "Archie," he said, "your levity in the face of stupidity is intolerable." "Maybe," I said, "but it keeps me breathing." He drew a breath through his nose, long and deliberate. "Did you see the method of administration?" "Teacup. No lipstick, no sugar spill, 1 spoon. My bet. He drank it unsuspecting. Somebody came before me." He nodded, eyes narrowed. "And Saul?" "Saved me from handcuffs and civic embarrassment." "Then I must commend him. You, however, I could strangle. Join the club, I said. That did it. He snapped the bell cord so sharply that Fritz appeared within seconds, napkin still over one arm. Beer, Wolfe barked. Yes, sir. Fritz vanished again, grateful for the excuse. The silence that followed wasn't comfortable. Wolfe sat staring at the edge of his desk as though willing it to confess. I watched him, wondering if he was thinking about Vance, or about something older, something buried deeper than cyanide. Finally he said, quieter, Archie, you were nearly killed tonight. That is not tolerable. I'll file a complaint, I said. He didn't rise to it. Instead he leaned back, eyes closed again. Go upstairs, sleep. Tomorrow we shall confront the living. The dead are beyond correction. That sounded like dismissal, so I headed for the door. Fritz passed me in the hall with the beer tray. For him, he murmured. I figured, I said. Upstairs I stripped off my wet coat and stood by the window, listening to the rain smudge the city. I should have gone to bed, but Wolfe's voice still echoed in my head, the rare crack in his granite calm. By morning the papers would scream headlines again, and by lunch Kramer would be pounding on our door. But for the moment, it was just the rain, the ghosts, and the smell of Fritz's midnight beer drifting up the stairs. Some nights in New York feel like the city's holding its breath, waiting to see who exhales first. This was one of them. The clock on Wolfe's desk said 10:57, but time didn't mean much. The air in the brownstone was already thick enough to stop a second-hand cold. I was back from an errand that made burglary look like a picnic. Saul Panzer had done the heavy lifting, as usual, but the package in my hand carried more voltage than a live wire in a rainstorm. It was a thin, government-sealed envelope stamped Classified, Office of Strategic Services, 1918-1947. Wolfe was in his chair, eyes closed, fingertips touching like he was praying for patience or forgiveness. I dropped the envelope on his desk. Straight from the Federal Archives, Saul says getting it cost him 2 favors and half his reputation. Then I must compensate him, Wolfe said without opening his eyes. Both favors and reputation are perishable commodities. Yeah, I said, but this one smells fresher than usual. You sure you want to open it? The last time you handled one of these, you ended up on an army payroll. His eyelids lifted. Your levity is untimely, Archie. Sure, I said, but it's either that or I start humming the Star-Spangled Banner. He sighed, reached for the letter opener, and slit the seal with surgical precision. Inside was a single manila folder marked Operation Morava. The papers were brittle, typed in wartime shorthand that read like poetry for paranoids. I leaned in as he spread them across the desk. The first page was an intelligence memo dated March 1919. The second contained a short roster of operatives. Wolfe's name, under his own, before his bulk and orchids, sat beside a single code name, Falcon. Who was Falcon? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for his beer, the one Fritz had delivered earlier, and took a slow sip. The amber liquid trembled in the glass, or maybe that was my hand. Finally, he said, Falcon was an American agent assigned to my command in Montenegro, Henry Vance. Brilliant linguist, persuasive, ambitious, and faithless. Knew or guessed, I said. When every road leads to the same grave, you start checking who built the map. He folded his hands. Yes, Henry Vance was Falcon, or rather, he became Falcon when treachery required a new name. I let out a low whistle. That's a hell of a family secret. You realize the government could still roast you for sitting on this? If they discover it, yes. Then why keep it? Because truth, he said softly, is the only indulgence I cannot forgo. I didn't say anything. It wasn't often Wolfe handed me a piece of his past without dressing it in sarcasm. He picked up another sheet, this one covered in code groups. His eyes flicked across the page with the kind of focus most men reserve for scripture. There, he said, pointing to a line near the bottom. Cipher reference Morava 14HV alive. That must be the origin of Retnick's notation. So Retnick wasn't bluffing, I said. Somebody out there really knew Vance was still kicking and wanted to keep it quiet. Indeed, and the person maintaining that illusion has now murdered twice to preserve it. I leaned back, whistling low. Operation Morava. Smuggling. Double agents. This is one for the ages. If you ever write your memoir, it'll need security clearance and a glossary. That earned me a faint flicker of amusement. I shall leave that to posterity, which I do not intend to consult. He lifted another page. It was a field report, typed in Wolfe's own wartime diction, crisp and dry as brandy. Subject Falcon has absconded with funds and documents pertaining to Balkan shipments. Presumed defected to neutral port via Adriatic line. Well, I said, there's our shipping connection. Falcon turns smuggler, Retnick keeps the books, and somebody decades later ties the bow with cyanide. Wolfe nodded, gaze distant. I was ordered to retrieve him in 1919. Instead, I recovered his uniform and a body too mutilated for identification. I reported his death and resigned my commission. That must have hurt your pension, I said. It wounded my integrity, which is less reparable. For once, I didn't wisecrack. There was something in his tone, a rare fracture in the marble, that made me feel like I'd wandered into holy ground. He replaced the papers, aligning their edges with care. You will type a précis of this file under my dictation. No copies, no loose notes. Then we shall reseal it. I moved to the typewriter, fingers ready. Shoot! He began slowly, voice measured. Summary. Operation Morava concerned covert monitoring of contraband routes through the Balkans. Field Agent Falcon presumed dead, later identified as Major Henry Vance. Evidence indicates post-war survival and re-engagement in Adriatic smuggling networks. Retnick served as intermediary. As I typed, the sound of the keys filled the room, a steady rhythm against the midnight silence. It was the sound of truth being locked into history. When he finished, I pulled the sheet, rolled it out, and placed it before him. One for the ages, boss. You gonna tell Kramer? Never. Then what's the plan? He leaned back, eyes half closed. To wait. Those who kill to conceal the past will come seeking assurance it remains hidden. When they do, we shall oblige them, with exposure. You make vengeance sound like etiquette. He actually smiled faintly. It is merely good manners. I reached for my cigarette case, but stopped when Fritz appeared in the doorway. Sir, he said softly, it is after midnight. Then bring coffee, Wolfe said. Fritz hesitated. Not beer? Coffee. Strong. That was when I knew he was rattled. Wolfe never traded hops for caffeine after midnight unless the world had gone crooked. When Fritz withdrew, I asked quietly, You all right? I am not, he said. A man whom I once considered a comrade betrayed his country, his wife, and by extension me, and now he is dead, twice over. You may consider that poetic justice, I do not. I said, You did what you had to do back then. Pfui, necessity is the alibi of cowards. That one hit harder than I liked. I decided to lighten it. If it helps, I'm still loyal, though my expense reports could use editing. That pulled a reluctant grunt from him, half exasperation, half relief. Archie, your loyalty is unprofitable but appreciated. Put that in writing and I'll frame it. He shook his head. Frame nothing. Go upstairs and sleep. Tomorrow I shall send Saul to trace the Adriatic line's surviving partners. Someone among them holds the final thread. I gathered the papers into the envelope, sealed it, and slid it into the office safe. The click echoed like punctuation at the end of a confession. When I turned back, Wolfe was staring out the window toward the rain-dark street. His reflection in the glass looked older, heavier, not from age, but from the kind of memory that doesn't fade. You know, I said quietly, for a man who never leaves his house, you sure travel far. He didn't turn. We all do, Archie. Some of us never return. That line deserved a fade-out, but I settled for flipping off the desk lamp. The room fell into half-shadow, the kind where ghosts sit quietly and wait their turn. And as I climbed the stairs, I could still hear the soft scrape of Wolfe's chair and the sigh of a man who'd just reopened a grave he'd buried 30 years too late. By the time she showed up, the city had already turned to velvet and vice. 11 o'clock, too late for decent visitors and too early for miracles. I opened the front door to find Marina Sava standing on the stoop, rain-soaked and shaking, wrapped in a coat that probably cost more than my car but did nothing to stop her trembling. Miss Sava, I said, either you've developed a fondness for midnight strolls or someone's after you. Her eyes, dark, wide, and scared enough to make an undertaker flinch, met mine. Please, she said, I must see Mr. Wolfe, now. Normally, anyone requesting an audience during orchid hours or after dinner would get as far as the sidewalk before Fritz's polite refusal closed the curtain. But Wolfe had anticipated her. He always does when logic beats luck. "In," I said, and led her to the office. The room was half in shadow, the single lamp casting a pool of gold on Wolfe's desk. He sat there like a carved idol, immense, immovable and waiting. The faint scent of orchids clung to his sleeve from his earlier vigil upstairs. "Miss Sava," he said, his voice low but firm, "you were told to stay away from this house." "Yes," she breathed, "but they will kill me." Wolfe's brow furrowed. "They?" "Mr. Kelder," she said, "and others. I do not know their names. They said if I spoke to the police I would vanish as Mr. Vance did." Archie Goodwin, defender of the distressed, leaned against the globe stand. "That line's getting popular this week." Her gaze darted to me, then back to Wolfe. "He made me deliver envelopes," she continued, "to post offices, to hotels. I did not know their contents, but later I saw one opened." "Blackmail," Wolfe said simply. She nodded, trembling. "Letters, old letters, from Mrs. Vance to her husband during the war. They are dangerous." "How dangerous?" I asked. "On a scale from scandal to execution?" "Enough," she whispered, "to ruin names still important." Wolfe exhaled slowly, folding his hands. "And what was your reward for such errands?" "Money," she admitted, "and safety." "Phooey, both ephemeral." He leaned back. "Miss Sava, I will have candour. You aided in crimes of coercion, yet you come here expecting sanctuary." "I expect truth," she said, voice breaking. "I have lied enough." It was quiet for a full 10 seconds. Then Wolfe spoke again, softer. "You may sit." She did, barely touching the chair's edge. Fritz appeared silently with a towel and coffee. She thanked him in a whisper that sounded foreign even to her own ears. I handed her a handkerchief. "Every dame who cries in Wolfe's office leaves with less mascara and more trouble," I said. "You might set a record." She gave a shaky laugh, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "You joke, Mr. Goodwin, but I'm already dead if I go back." Wolfe tapped a finger on the blotter. "You said they threatened you. Define they." "Kelder," she said immediately, "and the men who came from the ship." "The ship?" I asked. "The Dalmatia," she said, "the Adriatic Line's flagship. It docked tonight at Pier 41. The letters—" She hesitated, looking at Wolfe as if awaiting permission. He inclined his head. "Speak." "They are hidden there, in a false cargo manifest. Kelder said it was safest. No one inspects diplomatic freight." That made Wolfe's eyes open fully, which is as close to gasping as he gets. "A false manifest," he murmured. "Delightfully crude. And you are certain?" "I copied the code numbers myself," she said. "He said if I ever betrayed him, they would bury me under the Adriatic." I couldn't resist. "Lady, considering tonight's forecast, you'd better pack light." She turned toward me. "You mock, but you do not understand. I want to be free." Wolfe's voice dropped into something gentler. "Freedom, Miss Sava, is a word as treacherous as loyalty. Both can bankrupt a soul." That shut the room up nicely. Even I didn't have a comeback. He gestured toward me. "Archie, telephone Inspector Kramer." I blinked. "Kramer? Now?" "Yes. Tell him Miss Sava is here voluntarily. He is to suspend any warrant until morning." I picked up the phone, half expecting it to melt from the irony. Kramer answered like a man whose sleep had been replaced by coffee grounds. "Goodwin, if this is another midnight social call, I'll—" "Relax, Inspector. We've got a visitor who just changed your case from homicide to history lesson." "Who?" "Marina Sava. And before you bark, Wolfe says she's under our roof until morning. No arrests, no headlines." There was a pause that could have boiled water. "He's sheltering a material witness." "Call it protective custody, Brownstone style," Kramer grunted. "Fine, but if she vanishes, I'll send the DA's men to pull up Wolfe's orchids by the roots." "I'll put that in the guest book," I said, and hung up. When I turned back, Wolfe was watching Marina with something that almost passed for pity. "Miss Sava," he said, "you have erred gravely, yet there is still redemption through truth. You will tell me everything you know about Kelder's arrangement, from the first delivery to the last." She hesitated. "And if I do?" "I will see you protected." Her eyes widened. By you? By reason, he said, which in this house is the highest form of protection. So she told us. The words came halting at first, then faster, spilling like confession from a tired conscience. Kelda's letters to clients, payments routed through dummy shipping manifests, the network that linked Balkan smugglers to Manhattan's polite society, and always the shadow of the Dalmatia. When she finished, Wolfe was silent for nearly a minute. The clock ticked, the rain softened, and Fritz's coffee grew cold. Finally he said, Archie, you will note that the Dalmatia departs tomorrow at 8 a.m. You will telephone Saul at once. He is to verify the cargo manifest and, if possible, secure those letters before Kelda can retrieve them. Sure, I said, but remind me to buy stock in aspirin. Kramer's going to have kittens when he finds out you're one step ahead again. Inspector Kramer, Wolfe said with dignity, is welcome to his kittens. Marina looked between us, frightened but steadier now. You believe me? I do, Wolfe said. Your fear has the virtue of being genuine. Falsehood rarely trembles so well. She clasped her hands. Then, what happens to me? You will remain here tonight, he said. Fritz will prepare the south guest room. Tomorrow the police may have their questions. I will have mine first. She rose uncertainly. Thank you. He inclined his head, a monarch accepting tribute. You may thank me when this is resolved. Fritz appeared silently, signalling her to follow. She paused at the doorway, turning back to Wolfe. You could have turned me over to them, she said. I could have, he replied, but I despise waste. When the door closed behind her, I let out a low whistle. That's what I like about you, boss. You mix mercy with menace and serve it at room temperature. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for the bell cord. Beer, he said. I grinned. That's more like it. So what now? Now, he said, we wait for dawn and betrayal to finish its work. I leaned back, hands behind my head. You think Kelda will take the bait? He must, Wolfe said, eyes half-lidded. Men who live by deceit are always punctual when their ruin is scheduled. I chuckled. Well, if he shows up early, I'll serve him coffee, with sugar, not cyanide. Wolfe closed his eyes, the faintest ghost of a smile at the corners of his mouth. Archie, your humour is often vulgar, but tonight I find it reassuring. Glad to be of service, I said. Want me to lock the door? Unnecessary. The door locks itself when truth enters. I couldn't top that one, so I let it hang. Outside, the rain eased into silence, and the brownstone settled into its usual midnight stillness. Upstairs, a frightened woman tried to sleep off her past, and in the office below, Nero Wolfe sat motionless, marble, mind and mercy, waiting for the storm that would come with morning. There are few places in Manhattan where the air can pick your pocket, but the docks after midnight are one of them. The fog was crawling off the Hudson like a thief with bad intentions, wrapping around the pilings and swallowing sound. Out on Pier 41, the Dalmatia loomed like a ghost ship, lights dim, hull slick with rain, her name painted in letters that gleamed like false teeth. Saul Panzer stood beside me, collar up, flat cap pulled low. He's the kind of man who could tail a ghost through smoke and still get a clean description. We'd parked the sedan 2 blocks off and come on foot, hugging the shadow line between lampposts. You sure your friend in Washington won't miss this file? Saul murmured. If he does, I'll send him a postcard from Sing Sing, I said. Wolfe's words, not mine. We're just following up on a clue. Saul's mouth twitched. Sure. Just 2 law-abiding citizens breaking into a Yugoslav freighter at 1 a.m. Call it foreign correspondence. The gangway creaked underfoot as we stepped aboard. The Dalmatia smelled of oil, salt, and secrets, layers of them, compressed into the steel. Somewhere below, a generator thrummed softly. No watchman in sight. Either Kelda paid him off or buried him under the pier. I pulled my flashlight from my pocket, a thin beam cutting through the murk. Hold the fort, Panzer. I'll try the cargo hold. He grunted. I'll cover the deck. The hatch wasn't locked. That was mistake number 1. I slipped inside and descended the narrow iron steps into the bowels of the ship. The air got colder, wetter. Crates stacked like tombs lined both sides, stenciled with half-legible labels. Adriatic imports, diplomatic consignment, fragile. I cracked one open just enough to see straw, then metal. Inside were small tins marked with custom seals, but the lids had been peeled and resealed. The smuggling part of the operation wasn't even subtle. Wolfe's hunch had paid off. From my jacket pocket I pulled Wolfe's voice, literally. The portable field phone buzzed faintly when I cranked it. The line clicked, then that familiar bass rumble filled the air. "Report." "Archie here, live from Pier 41, I whispered. "We've got contraband stacked like Christmas presents, but no letters yet. Saul's topside." "Describe the manifest markings." "Blue ink, diplomatic stamps, inconsistent numbering. I'd say a third of them are fakes." A pause. "Then you are precisely where you should be. The letters were likely hidden within the falsified documentation, not the cargo itself. Inspect the ledgers." "Sure thing. And boss, if I get pinched for international espionage, tell the DA I was just sightseeing." He ignored that. "Exercise caution. Mr. Pantzer is to withdraw if gunfire ensues. You are not authorized to die." Thanks for the confidence vote. I set the phone down on a crate and moved toward a desk bolted to the bulkhead. The logbook lay open, pages damp, ink smeared. I flipped through entries, mostly routine cargo records, until I found one in neat, deliberate handwriting. "Manifest revision, hold 9, consignment CVHV." That was our link. CV for Clara Vance, HV for Henry. The initials that had been haunting this case like bad perfume. A sound scraped behind me. I turned, flashlight up. A broad-shouldered man in a damp overcoat stepped out of the shadows like a man born of them. His suit was wrinkled, his tie missing, but the pistol in his hand gleamed neat as arithmetic. "Well," I said, "if it isn't the Chamber of Commerce. You dock here often?" The man smiled thinly. "Goodwin, Wolfe's errand boy. I should have known he'd send someone with a sense of humour to do his dirty work." "Humour's cheaper than bullets," I said. "You ought to try it." He gestured with the gun. "Step away from the desk." "Mind if I keep my hands? They're sentimental." "Move." I moved slowly. The floor plates rang under my shoes. My flashlight beam caught a gleam of moisture near his collar. His hair was slicked with rain or sweat, or both. "Where are the letters, friend?" He laughed once. "You think I'd bring them here? You're late, Goodwin. They're gone." Define gone. Out of the country, as of an hour ago. "Then you don't need the gun," I said, "unless it's for decoration." He didn't blink. "I need it to keep my insurance active. Those letters were leverage for me, for others, but now they're a liability. Everyone who's seen them dies. Retnick, Vance, maybe you." That last word hung in the air like smoke. I shifted my stance, measuring the distance. He was 6 feet away, maybe less. His finger twitched on the trigger, nervous. That was mistake number 2. "Listen," I said mildly, "I've met dock workers with better manners and worse aim. Why don't you put that down before you embarrass yourself?" His sneer deepened. "You think this is a joke?" "No, but you will." The next second was a blur. Saul Pantzer's voice shouted from above, a metal clang, and the man flinched. That was all I needed. I lunged, grabbed his wrist, and twisted hard. The gun went off, the shot deafening in the hold, ricocheting like a hornet. My shoulder caught him square, and we went down together in a tangle of limbs and curses. For a moment it was just noise, boots scraping, grunts, a metallic clatter. Then Saul appeared in the hatchway, flashlight cutting through the haze. "You alive?" he called. "Mostly," I grunted, driving my elbow into Kelder's ribs. The gun skittered across the floor. Saul moved fast, kicking it aside and hauling the man upright. Kelder's nose was bleeding, his breath coming in ragged spurts. "You idiots," he spat. "You have no idea what you've stepped into." "Try us," I said, brushing dust off my coat. "We're quick studies." He shook his head, half laughing, half choking. "It's bigger than you think. They'll burn this ship before you find what you're looking for." "Who's they?" His eyes flicked toward the ledger. I grabbed it and flipped the pages again. The last entry was torn clean out. Beneath it, a blood stain, fresh, small, but unmistakable, soaked through the paper. 2 letters scrawled beside it in pencil. CV. "Clara Vance," I muttered. "She's still in the game." Kelder tried to speak, but Saul tightened his grip. "Let him talk," I said. No need, Saul replied grimly. He's not saying another word. Look. The stranger's eyes had rolled back. He was sagging in Saul's grip. His pulse fluttered once, then stopped. I swore under my breath. Poison? Saul checked quickly. Capsule? Bit it when I grabbed him. Neat trick, I said. Wolf's gonna love this. I grabbed the field phone and cranked it again. Wolf answered immediately, as if he'd been waiting for the shot. Well? Bad news, boss. Our man just took the quick exit. Letters gone. Found a blood-stained ledger page with Clara's initials. Saul bent to the wallet. ID says Bojan Kralik, he said. Kelder's fixer. A pause, long and heavy. Describe the stain. Small, fresh. He must have met her, or someone pretending to be her. Indeed. Wolf's voice was low, steady. Retrieve the ledger. Return at once, the game has accelerated. Yeah, I said. So has my heartbeat. Saul straightened, hauling the fixer's body to one side. What about the police? Let them have the corpse, Wolf said through the receiver, not the clue. Copy that, I said, and hung up. We stood there for a moment, the ship groaning softly around us, fog seeping through the open hatch. The gun on the deck gleamed dully under Saul's light. Somewhere outside, a tugboat horn moaned, a long, low note that sounded too much like a warning. I picked up the torn ledger page carefully, folding it into my pocket. Saul, let's make ourselves scarce before the local law decides we're tonight's entertainment. He nodded. What about him? Leave him. He's beyond help. And explanation. We moved back toward the steps, boots echoing on steel. As I reached the hatch, I glanced once more at the desk. The fog had crept inside, curling around the lamp, and for a split second I thought I saw movement. Something small, quick, human. But when I looked again, there was nothing. Just the half-lit cargo hold and the faint smell of cyanide. We hit the dock running. The fog swallowed us whole, the ship fading behind us like a bad memory. Halfway to the car, my pocket buzzed. Wolf's voice again, faint through the static. Archie, he said, one question before you return. Shoot. Did Kelder say anything? Anything at all before he died? Yeah, I said, breath misting in the cold. He said they'd burn the ship before we found what we're looking for. Then hurry, Wolf said, because if I'm right, they already have. I stopped short. Down the pier, a dull orange flicker was rising through the fog. Then another, then smoke. The Dalmatia was burning from the inside out, the flames licking through her hull like a confession set on fire. Saul stared. Guess he wasn't bluffing. No, I said, watching the blaze climb higher. And if those letters were aboard, they're ash now. The sirens started in the distance, wailing growing louder. I turned away from the inferno, the heat biting my face. Come on, I said. We'll let Kramer sort through what's left. Wolf's got enough ashes of his own to rake tonight. As we vanished into the fog, the Dalmatia's masts cracked and fell, sending sparks into the sky like dying stars. Somewhere between the smoke and the harbour wind, I thought I heard Wolf's words again. Low, measured, inevitable. The game has accelerated. He wasn't kidding. If there's one sound that can ruin the digestion of a Nero Wolfe morning, it's the front door buzzer going off before the coffee's cold. Fritz had just brought in a tray, egg soft, toast perfect, Wolfe's demitasse gleaming, when the bell split the quiet. I was halfway to the door when the voice I'd expected least barked up the hall. "Open up, Goodwin! I've got a warrant." Inspector Kramer never needed an invitation, but hearing the word warrant in his mouth was like finding mustard on fine linen. I opened the door, and there he was, rumpled raincoat, cigar already lit, temper smoking harder. "Morning, Inspector," I said cheerfully. "You're early for dinner and late for breakfast. What's the occasion?" He shoved a folded paper at me. "Obstruction of justice. Your boss is in it up to his 6th chin." "That'll take a big warrant," I said, leading him toward the office. "This way. Mind the orchids, they bruise easier than you do." Wolfe was behind his desk, napkin on knee, eyes halfway closed over his breakfast. Fritz had frozen mid-step at the sight of Kramer, but Wolfe waved him off like a bored monarch. "Inspector," he said evenly, "you are early. My orchids do not open until 9. Kramer slapped the warrant onto the desk. "Save it. You've been hiding witnesses, tampering with evidence, and playing cat and mouse with homicide. The DA's office wants answers." Wolfe dabbed his lips with a napkin, unfolded the paper, and read it without changing expression. Then he folded it again, set it on the edge of the desk, and sighed. This, Mr. Kramer, is not a legal instrument. It is literary detritus, prose masquerading as authority. Kramer's jaw clenched around the cigar. You think you're untouchable, don't you? No, Wolfe said mildly. Merely inconvenient. I couldn't help it. If you two start quoting poetry, I'll fetch violins. Kramer swung on me. And you? How long have you been cleaning up his messes? You were seen on the docks last night. Just sightseeing, I said. You should try it sometime. The harbour's lovely this time of year, except for the burning freighters. Cut it. He pointed a finger at Wolfe. One of your pet informants is dead, and your lady client's mixed up in it. If you're holding anything back, I swear. I hold much back, Wolfe interrupted, but not from necessity, from taste. Kramer let out a short, hard laugh. You'll need more than taste when this hits the Gazette. They're already writing editorials about your interference. Phooey. Wolfe reached for the bell cord. Fritz, beer. Fritz appeared as if summoned by magic. Kramer glared at the chilled glass when it arrived as though the foam itself were mocking him. You're impossible, he muttered. Undoubtedly, Wolfe said, sipping, but you persist, which I admire. Have you considered that your warrant may be premature? Kramer exhaled a long cloud of smoke. Premature? Try late. Clara Vance has disappeared. That pulled even Wolfe upright. Disappeared? Vanished from her apartment this morning, Kramer said. Her maid claims she left around dawn, with a man calling himself Mr. Kelder. I whistled softly. If women start disappearing, I cancel dates till further notice. Kramer ignored me. Now tell me, Wolfe, was she part of your plan, or just another pawn in your little game? Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Inspector, if I were playing games, you would not know the rules. That stopped Kramer just long enough for the phone to ring. I crossed to answer it. Saul's voice came through, thin and urgent. Archie, newsflash. The harbour police found a lifeboat adrift. Inside, Kelder's coat, soaked in blood. I turned to Wolfe. You'll want to sit for this one. He didn't move. Mr. Kramer, he said, his tone a quiet thunder, it seems your warrant is the least of our problems. Kramer met his gaze, grim but conceding. For once, Wolfe, I hope you're wrong. And just like that, the office air got thicker than cigar smoke. Dinner at the Brownstone is supposed to be sacred. 8 o'clock sharp, table laid like a chapel altar, and conversation forbidden unless it improves the digestion. So, when the bell rang midway through Fritz's masterpiece of veal in Madeira sauce, the sound was as heretical as laughter at a funeral. Fritz froze at the dining room threshold, napkin in hand. Wolfe's eyes lifted from his plate with the slow precision of a man considering whether to commit homicide or indigestion. Confound it, he muttered. No mortal soul has leave to intrude during dinner. I started to rise, but Fritz shook his head. No, sir, it is for Mr. Wolfe. His voice was tight, formal. A telegram. He crossed the carpet like a man walking into a courtroom and laid the yellow envelope beside Wolfe's plate. Then he stepped back and waited. The silence in the room could have been weighed by the ounce. Wolfe stared at it without touching it for 3 full seconds, then tore it open with one motion. Clean, surgical. His eyes moved across the lines, and I saw the change come over him. The muscles along his jaw set, his shoulders stiffened a fraction, and all the warmth drained from the air like someone had cracked a window to the East River. He didn't sigh, didn't curse. He simply folded the telegram once, placed it beside his napkin, and said, Mrs. Vance is dead. Fritz's hand went to his mouth. Mine went for my coffee cup, mostly for something to hold. Dead? I asked. As in murdered, Wolfe said evenly. Found this evening near Pier 41. The police have been diligent. I whistled softly. Murder leaves better calling cards than the post office. Archie. Just my name, quiet but warning. I shut up. Fritz, pale and shaken, murmured, Shall I remove the veal, sir? No, Wolfe said. We shall finish it. The world persists. But he didn't take another bite. The candlelight caught the heavy shadows under his eyes, and for once I saw something in his face that wasn't calculation. It was memory, a kind of grim inevitability that said he'd known this ending before it arrived. After a long silence, he spoke again, softer now. The police will come presently. Kramer is a conscientious man. He will bring the ring. The ring? I asked. Yes. He lifted the telegram and read aloud, voice stripped of inflection. Quote, female victim identified by signet ring engraved CV, bearing fresh abrasions shaped like the letter K, unquote. Kramer will come tonight, Wolfe said. City Hall will insist on it. I frowned. K for Kelder? Undoubtedly, Wolfe said, but whether as accusation or deception, that remains to be seen. Fritz gathered the plates silently, his movements slow and reverent. He vanished toward the kitchen, leaving the faint scent of wine and pepper behind him. Wolfe leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. The lamplight burnished the curve of his forehead, and I realized he wasn't thinking of blackmail or cyanide or burned ships. He was thinking of the woman who'd sat in his office 2 days ago. Voice steady but eyes afraid. He said, more to himself than to me, she was brave. Foolish, but brave. I nodded. She didn't seem the type to run. She didn't, Wolfe murmured. She was hunted, and now the pursuit ends where it began, by the river. He reached for his beer, then stopped, hand hovering over the glass. Phooey. The word came out brittle. No. Beer would profane it. I leaned back, giving him room. There are moments in that brownstone when the air feels thick enough to write on. This was one of them. Finally, he looked at me, all the weight of decision back in his eyes. Archie. Here. Tomorrow morning, he said, we work. No clients, no fees, no distractions. The investigation resumes. Mrs. Vance will have justice. Sure, I said. But where do we start? He rose, a rare deliberate movement, and dropped his napkin onto the tablecloth. We start, he said, by exhuming the truth. And with that, he turned toward the elevator, leaving his untouched beer gleaming cold under the candlelight, and me staring at a telegram that had just buried the past and dug up something worse. By 10 that night, the brownstone was quiet enough to hear the radiator thinking. I was finishing a report at my desk, coaxing the typewriter like a mule that hated me personally, when the doorbell rang again. Fritz had long gone to bed, so I opened it myself. Inspector Kramer stood there. Evening, Goodwin, he said, voice rough around the edges. He up? He's vertical, if that's what you mean, I said. And since it's past beer o'clock, you might even get civility. Kramer grunted. I'll take my chances. I led him into the office. Wolfe was in his chair, the lamp throwing soft amber light across his face, a chessboard set out before him. The Black King stood alone in the centre, surrounded by pawns like supplicants. Inspector, Wolfe said, not looking up, your presence at this hour implies fatigue or capitulation. Which is it? Neither, Kramer said, dropping into the red leather chair. Call it desperation. I've got 2 corpses, a burned ship, and a dozen witnesses who can't agree on the weather, let alone a motive. You said I'd be back. I did. Wolfe nudged a pawn forward with one finger. And here you are. Kramer pulled a folded folder from his coat and laid it on the desk. Kelder's war record. We dug it up from military archives. Turns out he served in the Balkans, same outfit as Henry Vance. They both had clearance under a project labelled Operation Morava. Mean anything to you? Wolfe's hand paused mid-reach. More than you know, he said quietly. I leaned back, watching. Wolfe's tone had that undertaker's calm he uses when the pieces of a puzzle start falling into place. Kramer lit his cigar finally, the match flaring between them like a signal. You're going to tell me what it means, Wolfe, because I'm fresh out of guesses. Wolfe looked up, eyes sharp behind half-lidded calm. Very well. Operation Morava involved the extraction of certain intelligence couriers during the last months of the Great War. Falcon, codename for Henry Vance, was the conduit. Kelder, his adjutant, carried the dispatches. Both men survived, both reinvented themselves, and both profited, until the truth threatened to surface. Kramer exhaled smoke. You're saying Kelder killed Vance? Then who killed Kelder? Retribution, Wolfe said simply. Or necessity, the same hand that arranged both deaths. Clara Vance? Wolfe shook his head. No, she was merely a liability. Someone else manoeuvred the board. That was my cue to jump in. If Wolfe ever takes up poker, I'm cashing out early. He plays with loaded decks. Quiet, Archie. Wolfe tapped the chessboard, shifting a white knight to corner the Black King. Inspector, you are struggling because you think of murder as linear. A kills B for reason C, but this case is recursive. Each death feeds another. Follow the profit and you'll find your culprit. Profit? Kramer frowned. You mean money? I mean advantage, Wolfe corrected. The Adriatic Line's insurance claims, the smuggling network buried under diplomatic seals, the value of secrets that should have died in 1919. Someone ensured they stayed buried. Permanently. Kramer stared at him, cigar forgotten. You've got a name. I have a certainty, Wolfe said. A name will require proof. Bring me the manifest fragment found in Kelder's cabin. There should be a signature, one that doesn't belong. Kramer hesitated. And if I do? Then, Wolfe said, moving the final piece on the board, the game concludes. For a long moment, neither spoke. The smoke curled between them like a truce flag. Kramer rose slowly. All right, Wolfe, I'll get it. But if this turns into another of your parlor miracles— It will not, Wolfe interrupted gently. It will be arithmetic. Kramer nodded once. Fine. You win this round. As he reached the door, I called after him. Inspector, next time bring beer instead of warrants. It makes for better company. He shot me a weary half-smile. If I live through this one, Goodwin, I just might. When the door closed behind him, Wolfe leaned back, eyes on the abandoned chessboard. Archie, he murmured, fetch the globe. I wish to trace the geography of guilt. And as the lamplight fell across his hands, broad, deliberate, unshakable, I realized the next move on that board wouldn't be Kramer's, or mine. It would be Wolfe's checkmate. Evening had dressed the brownstone in velvet shadows and lamplight, the kind Wolfe favors when he plans to crush a man's soul with vocabulary alone. Kramer had collared Kelder uptown an hour earlier, alive, irritated, and minus the blood-soaked coat the harbour boys found in that staged lifeboat. The office was set like a courtroom, Wolfe behind his desk, I to his right with notebook ready, Kramer looming near the globe, Saul Panzer silent by the wall, and the two guests, Marina Sava, pale as milk glass, and George Kelder, sweating into his imported collar. If Wolfe had worn a robe and powdered wig, it wouldn't have felt out of place. Gentlemen, Miss Sava. His voice rolled out like thunder that had learned manners. This will be brief, for my digestion forbids prolixity after dinner. That was the closest thing to Mercy Kelder was going to get. He shifted in his chair. If this is about the papers, or that ridiculous boat trick— It is about murder, Wolfe said. 3 by my count, though one masqueraded as suicide. Kramer's brow furrowed. You're saying Kelder? Wolfe lifted a finger, silencing him as effectively as a gavel. Inspector, you will have your turn. First, the sequence. Mr. Kelder's shipping enterprise, the Adriatic Line, was foundering, its debts extensive, its wartime contracts dubious. Then, by remarkable coincidence, blackmail letters began circulating, letters known only to the late Major Vance and his wife. How convenient that Retnick, a photographer with access to forgery, should serve as the courier. Kelder's mouth twitched. That's conjecture. On the contrary, Wolfe leaned forward, voice smooth as a stiletto. You revived an old extortion scheme conceived during Operation Morava. You believed Vance dead, but when Retnick unearthed proof otherwise, you used him, then silenced him when he demanded more. Later, you poisoned Vance to prevent exposure. And when Clara Vance faltered, when conscience conquered fear, you silenced her as well. Marina gasped softly. Saul didn't move. He didn't have to. His eyes alone could have pinned Kelder to the chair. Kelder barked. You've no proof. None. Phooey, Wolfe said quietly. You mistake me for the police. Proof is for courts. I deal in truth. However— He reached into the desk drawer and produced a small envelope. Inside gleamed Clara's ring, the gold dulled by scratches. Here is what your conscience left behind. The abrasions form a letter, K carved as she died. She could name no name, so she wrote one instead. Kelder's eyes darted to Marina. She's lying. She helped me. Marina stood abruptly. I helped no one. I carried envelopes, that's all. You told me they were business files. Wolfe inclined his head slightly. Miss Sava, your contrition is noted. It may yet spare you the lesser charge of accessory. Kramer, puffing on his cigar, muttered, "I'll be damned. The ring." "You already are," I said, "but that's beside the point." Kelder rose half out of his seat. "You can't." "Sit," Wolfe commanded. The word landed like a physical blow. Kelder obeyed. "Inspector," Wolfe continued, "Mr. Pantzer recovered a blood-stained ledger page from the Dalmatiah, bearing Kelder's initials and a notation beside Retnick's name, paid in full. That, combined with the poison residue analysis you obtained, completes your case." Kramer drew a slow breath, exhaled, and gave Wolfe a look that was equal parts exasperation and reluctant admiration. "Foy to paperwork," he said gruffly, "but you're right. Again." "I am gratified," Wolfe replied. "Justice, though belated, must not be denied its ceremony." Kramer jerked his head toward the door. "Let's go, Kelder." As Saul guided him out, Marina began to cry softly. Wolfe did not look at her. He reached for his beer, poured it with the care of a priest handling communion, and took a single measured sip. "If Wolfe charged by the syllable," I told Kramer, "we'd own half of Manhattan by now." Kramer paused at the threshold, cigar clamped between his teeth. "He already does, Goodwin. Only difference is, he collects in truth, not rent." Wolfe's lips curved faintly. "Archie, remind me to send the inspector a case of that beer he so disdains." "Sure," I said, jotting it down. "To celebrate the one time he said you're right without breaking into hives." And as the door shut behind them, Wolfe leaned back, folded his hands, and closed his eyes. Not in triumph, but in the quiet satisfaction of a man who had once again rearranged chaos into order, all without leaving his chair. The brownstone always feels bigger after a case is closed. Maybe it's the silence, or maybe it's just relief stretching its legs. Either way, that evening the air had the texture of calm, rare currency in our line of business. Fritz had outdone himself. The veal was tender enough to shame silk, the sauce a quiet masterpiece, and the kitchen smelled faintly of triumph and Madeira. Wolfe sat at the head of the dining table, half in shadow, regarding his empty plate as though it had submitted to reason. He dabbed his lips with his napkin, signalled Fritz with the smallest flick of his hand, and said, "Beer." Fritz appeared like a stage cue fulfilled, bearing a frosted glass and a bottle cold enough to raise envy in the Arctic. Wolfe poured with his usual reverence, watching the amber foam rise to the rim. "It is a modest indulgence," he said, "but a deserved one." I leaned back, stretching. If Wolfe ever took up modesty as a hobby, we'd have to enlarge the house. His eyes half closed. "Flippancy is tolerable, Archie, only when it amuses me. Fortunately, it sometimes does." I grinned. "Then I'll keep working at it. Practice makes perfect." Fritz withdrew silently, leaving us alone with the comfort of food and the faint clink of glass. The city outside was dimming into its evening hum, horns softened by distance, the occasional siren fading like a tired promise. For once there was no phone ringing, no Inspector Kramer threatening warrants, and no corpse waiting for an explanation. Wolfe sipped. "You may inform Mr. Panzer his account is settled. He performed admirably." "I'll do that," I said. "He'll appreciate being called admirable by a man who thinks adjectives are a waste of breath." That earned the faintest lift of an eyebrow. "A precise description is never wasted, Archie. It clarifies truth." "Sure," I said, "but so does beer under the right lighting." He ignored that, which meant I'd scored a minor hit. The silence stretched comfortably between us, filled only by the tick of the mantel clock and the faint hiss of the radiator. I looked around the room, the books, the soft lamp glow, the peace that came after the kind of chaos most people wouldn't survive with their sanity intact. "So, Kelder's headed for trial, Marina's clearing her conscience, and Kramer's probably muttering your name like an unpleasant hymn. What now?" "What now," Wolfe repeated, setting down his glass, "is precisely what always follows. Digestion and reflection." He leaned back, fingers steepled. "The world insists on sprouting weeds, Mr. Goodwin. One may uproot them, but never banish the soil from which they grow." I nodded. "Meaning the past?" "Meaning folly," he said. "The past, Mr. Goodwin, is a weed best uprooted completely, yet men water it, out of guilt, nostalgia, or stupidity." I chuckled. "You don't forgive, you just file forgiveness alphabetically." That got him. The corner of his mouth twitched. "Your wit, though coarse, is occasionally serviceable." "Thanks," I said. "I'll have it bronzed." He gestured toward the tray Fritz had left. "Help yourself, Archie." I poured a second glass, watching the bubbles climb. "Then here's to gardening," I said, raising it. "May the weeds stay gone and the lawn stay quiet." Wolfe inclined his head. "Your metaphor is inelegant but apt." "That's me," I said, "apt but inelegant." He closed his eyes, sinking back into the chair like a general retiring from battle. The faintest smile, real, unguarded, crossed his face. "Archie," he murmured, "you are incorrigible." "Thank you, sir," I said. The clock struck 8. Outside, Manhattan sighed into the night. Inside, the world was finally arranged again, tidy, logical, and bathed in lamplight. Wolfe lifted his glass in a small salute, and I returned it, the clink of glass soft but sure. For once no words were needed.